literature, okay? Now, what I want to do next is give you a general outline of the book of Revelation so you will understand the big picture of Revelation before we dig in on some of the particulars of it, okay? So this is how Revelation goes. So it begins with an introduction and then letters to 7 churches. And these 7 churches in the book of Revelation are given warnings. Most of them are not living the way that God wants them to live, and so they're given warnings about how they should live, all right? Then it moves to, and we're going to look more closer at this in a moment, a vision of God and the Lamb. So John is transported to heaven, and he sees heaven just before all of this is going to happen that we see that comes after that. And then we see the opening of the 7 seals and the sound of the 7 trumpets. And this is just representative of all the things that are about to come at the end of the world, how the end of the world is going to go down, basically, okay? And that's when we see so much of the apocalyptic literature, which has symbols and all of those kinds of things, okay? Then we move to a conflict between the people of God and the powers of Satan. Who is the main person when we think about the powers of Satan? Who are we talking about in the book of Revelation? It's not a trick question.
Sin. Or non-believers.
Antichrist, there we go, okay? Which will ultimately, the Antichrist becomes indwelt by Satan, all right, in the midst of this. And so we'll talk about more about Antichrist in just a moment. We see the pouring out of the 7 bowls, which is judgment that happens, and then judgment on Babylon. And I said Babylon is representative of all the world systems, the world economic system, there'll be a one world religion at this point, and that world religious system. But then we get into chapter 19, and chapter 19 is the good stuff. This is God's ultimate victory. God wins, and we see, John says, and then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And he talks about how there will be no more tears and no more death and no more pain. All of those things have passed away, he says, and that brings us to the conclusion. And so this is what Revelation is about. You can get so lost in the weeds on Revelation that you forget the main point of the book of Revelation, and it's 2 words: God wins. Right? That is what Revelation is all about. So let me give you a few keys to interpreting Revelation, and then we're going to talk about some of the ways that people have interpreted it over the years. First of all, we have to recognize the symbols and what they mean. So when we see a beast rising out of the sea, who is the beast and what does he represent? The beast is the Antichrist and represents this nation, this kingdom that he has built up around him. So that's the first thing. We have to recognize the symbols. We need to, though there is a lot of symbolism, we need to try to interpret as literally as possible. When you see a beast with 7 heads rising out of the sea, you can go, yeah, that's probably symbolic of something, okay? But when you see Jesus is going to reign for 1,000 years, if you can interpret that literally, all right? And so we need to be as literal as possible as we do that. And there's going to be some debate about what's symbolism and what's meant to be taken literally, and we just have to dig in on those when we get to those, okay? We don't want to miss the forest for the trees. That's the most important thing. We don't want to get so bogged down in stuff. When I was in my early 20s, and I guess most of y'all weren't alive at that time, okay? When I was in my early 20s, they came out with a series of books called Left Behind. Y'all ever heard of those? Mm-hmm. Kirk Cameron started the movies, a couple of them. They didn't get very far. And I read them all. This is when I first started trying to understand Revelation. I read them all voraciously, okay? And
did we talk about this movie in here recently? Is this a movie too?
It was a movie too, yeah. It was about the rapture, and the rapture occurs, and all the Christians leave, and then it's all the people are left behind and go through the tribulation period that we're going to find in the book of Revelation. And I got to about book 20, and I noticed book 20 went through about 3 hours of real time in the book, and I'm like, oh, they're just trying to sell books now. Okay, and it took me 20 books to realize that, so y'all can tell how naive I was at the time. But the point was that it just got lost in the forest, and it got lost in the trees, and you missed what the big picture was of what was going to happen. And so you don't want to miss the forest for the trees, and you want to remember that big theme, that God wins. That is the big theme of Revelation. We want to always keep that first and foremost in our mind. All right, so let's talk about 4 ways that Christians throughout history have read the book of Revelation. I'm going to try to explain these as much as possible. And listen, we're about to get a little into the woods here, so y'all just hang with me, because I'm going to take us to where I think the right place to do this is, the right way to interpret this is. But I want you to see these other ways that people have interpreted Revelation over the years. The first is what's called preterist. Then there's the historical, the idealist, and the futurist. So preterist is a view that the book was mainly fulfilled in the early 1st century. This book would say that John's audience in the 7 churches would have read the book in this particular way, as if something was going to happen in the next few years, and that's how they would have read it, and then it would have been fulfilled during times of 1st century persecution. A lot of persecution happened. There were some awful things that happened in the 1st century, but this view cannot fully account for all the things that have obviously not happened yet. There are way too many things that have obviously not happened yet in this book, okay? So that we can rule out the preterist view, I think. The historical view, this book is a roadmap of history from the 1st century today, and this was the dominant way of interpreting Revelation through the 17th century. Links between Revelation's contents and history events, though, have always kind of proven forced. So they'd say, hey, look, Hitler has come. He's obviously the Antichrist. It was like you're reading the book of Revelation with the newspaper in one hand, and people still do that today. I think y'all seen that plenty of times. I saw something, Russell Brand, I saw an article, do y'all know who I'm talking? Y'all probably know better than I do who Russell Brand is, but was talking about Amazon had this palm reading thing. He was like, that's obviously the mark of the beast. I'm like, Russell Brand, I've never heard you talk about Jesus in your life. but you think that's the mark of the beast. Anyway, so there's a danger in that. The idealist view says Revelation is primarily about timeless principles, and Revelation certainly contains timeless principles, but it also has specific historic or future events, and this kind of view denies specific or historic future meaning for the book. And so that brings us to a futurist view, which says the majority of this book is about things that are yet to come, and this is the dominant way most people approach Revelation today. Now, we have to guard against saying that the book has nothing to say about us in the present, but this makes the most sense of it given all the evidence. And this is the way that probably you've always heard the book of Revelation interpreted, as if this is about things that are yet to come. And there's a good reason for that, okay? This is where this is taking us, okay? Now, the next question about Revelation is, what do you do with the millennium? This is found in Revelation chapter 20. And we see that it says, then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, Satan, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. So at the end of the book of Revelation, we see God defeats the forces of Satan. He sends Satan to hell and sends him there and to the pit, and he seals it. So he can't deceive the nations for any longer for 1,000 years. And then they say he'll be released for a little while. I'll be honest with you, chapter 20 just doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand why God would just seal him for 1,000 years. Why not just seal him forever? You got him, why would you let him go? God has ideas that I don't understand. But this is one of the ways that people have struggled the most to interpret what chapter 20 means. And so there are really 3 different ways that we view this, what is called the millennium, the 1,000 years. How do we view the 1,000 years? There are amillennialism, postmillennialism, and premillennialism. So amillennialism says there's not going to be a millennial reign of Christ. It stresses the symbolism of all this in Revelation, and it says that 1,000 years is just representative of a time period, maybe representative even right now. We are in the millennium right now, okay? It emphasizes that Satan is bound during this present age, but it often improperly spiritualizes Revelation. So we talked about needing to interpret literally as much as possible, and often what this kind of amillennialism will do is just overly spiritualize everything. If it weren't for Revelation chapter 20, I would really like amillennialism. But there's Revelation chapter 20 that says he will reign he will be locked up for 1,000 years while Jesus reigns. So because what amillennialism says is everything's going to get really bad and then God's going to win and it's going to be over. Sounds great to me. But Revelation 20 says everything's going to be really bad and God's going to win and he's going to bind Satan for 1,000 years and Satan's going to come back for a little while and then he's going to defeat him finally and forever. Okay, so amillennialism just tries to pretend like chapter 20 is not there. And we can't do that, okay? The next is postmillennialism. That says Christ will return after these 1,000 years. So it says the progress of the gospel is what produces the millennium. So postmillennialism says that the church is going to advance, the gospel is going to advance, the world is going to get better and better and better until Jesus is just like, all right, I think I'll come back now. This looks good enough for me. That's basically what postmillennialism says. It emphasizes the power of the gospel to triumph, which is true. Okay? It sees things getting much better in the world before Christ's return. Postmillennialism was the most dominant way of understanding Revelation up to the beginning of the 20th century. People believe that the gospel, because think about what had happened in history, especially in America. We'd had two great awakenings where people just got saved and churches grew and all these great, incredible things were happening. And then the 20th century happened. Do y'all remember what happened at the beginning of the 20th century? Well, there are two big things that happened in the 20th century. Do y'all remember what those were? Come on, guys.
World Wars.
World Wars. There were two world wars where millions of people died in war. And do y'all remember what was sandwiched in between those two world wars?
Great Depression.
The Great Depression. Okay? So, up until the early 20th century, everybody was like, all right, the church is just going to advance. The world is just going to get better and better and better and better. And then Jesus is going to come back. And then World War I happened, and they're like, ooh. Maybe not, but no, okay, maybe we're okay. And then the Great Depression happens and people are flinging themselves out of the tops of windows, and they're like, okay, we got through that. And then World War II happens, and which is the worst of all of it, and so suddenly people are like, maybe things aren't going to keep getting better until Jesus comes back. And so this idea of what we're going to look at next, which is premillennialism, which was already out there and I believe was the doctrine of the early church, but it kind of been put on the back burner for a while, suddenly becomes a more dominant view. It says Christ will return to the earth and establish his peaceful reign in a visible and powerful manner. Premillennialism calls for a consistent interpretation of the flow and the visions of Revelation. It recognizes that much of the book includes things that are still to come, and it places the triumph of Christ in history. In other words, this is not symbolic. This is Jesus is really coming back, and he's really going to defeat Satan, and he's really going to create a new heaven and a new earth, and he's really going to rule forever. That's basically what premillennialism says, right? That's what Revelation says, okay? If you don't overly spiritualize and put too much symbolism into Revelation, that is exactly what it says, all right? So premillennialism to me is the obvious way that we ought to be interpreting Revelation. Now, there are two kinds of premillennialism, so let me talk about those real quick. One is historic premillennialism. It recognizes the world's going to get worse through time. It says that Christ is going to reign 1,000 years after his second coming and before final judgment. And it says several events, including the taking of the gospel to all nations and the rule of the Antichrist, must come before the millennium. So it is saying that we're going to see the Great Tribulation, where things get worse and worse and worse, and then we're going to see with the Antichrist ruling, and then we're going to see Jesus defeat him, which is the way we ought to be interpreting Revelation. So that's historic premillennialism. But there's a second kind of premillennialism, which is dispensational premillennialism. And this agrees with most of the tenets of historic premillennialism, but it emphasizes that the church is going to be raptured before the millennium, before the tribulation. It sees Israel and the church as distinct entities, and it emphasizes that the promised land is guaranteed to Israel. I think each of these views is distinct. They're not as different as we tend to think they are, but I believe that final one is the best way of understanding Revelation. It too requires some work to get there, but they all do. Okay, so here is the flow of Revelation as I see it. We see the introduction, we see the letters to the churches, then we go from the letters to the churches to this vision in heaven. And what dispensational premillennialism says is between the letters and the vision in heaven, the rapture occurs. Now, it does not say that in Revelation. It doesn't say anything. But what we see throughout the rest of Revelation is no mention of the church. And we go to other parts of the Bible and see mention of the rapture, specifically 1 Thessalonians talks about that. And so that's why I think this is the best way of understanding Revelation, okay? But there are dangers in interpreting Revelation, and the first is Antichrist hunting. So look at these pictures. This is the Pope, Nero, Henry Kissinger, Hitler, Napoleon, and Ronald Reagan. What do all these men have in common?
They held a lot of power.
They did hold a lot of power, yes.
They're all men.
People thought they were the Antichrist. That's right, okay? So every single one of them, like, Reagan too? Come on, you know? But, you know, some of them you could see. You look at Hitler, you're like, yeah, if anybody was the Antichrist, it was Hitler, you know? And if you were in the first century, you would probably think that of Nero also. I mean, Nero was an evil, evil dude. But and really every pope through history has been accused of being the Antichrist, at least since the Reformation. And that's a real danger as we interpret Revelation. Like, okay, this is what it says about the Antichrist. Man, Elon Musk is crazy. Maybe he's the Antichrist. You know, I mean, like, you hear people do stuff like that all the time. And that is a grave danger in interpreting Revelation. So that's the first danger I'd warn you against. The second is misunderstanding last days. When you hear the phrase last days, what do you think?
I think of like 5 days until we're gone.
Okay, all right, good. I'm hoping you'd say that, because that's what we tend to think of when we hear that phrase last days.
It's like hit panic button.
Yeah, but somebody read Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. Somebody read that for me.
Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed the heir of all things. Through whom also He created the world. Okay, so Savannah said what I think most of us think when we hear last days. It's time to hit the panic button. What is the writer of Hebrews saying about the last days?
Last days have been going on since Hebrews was written.
It started at least back in Hebrews, okay? And so when we think last days, we should think that we are in, if somebody says, man, it feels like we're in the last days. You might have heard that during COVID or something like that, or just, you know, when Kanye came up on the stage when Taylor Swift got her award. I don't know. People have used last days for all kinds of stuff, you know. But when you hear somebody say something like that, you can say, yes, we are in the last days. We've been in the last days since Jesus ascended into heaven. The last days began then, and they will end when He returns. That's what the Bible means by the last days, and so we need to warn against that, okay? The next thing, we need to guard against overreading the newspaper. You see stuff like this in the newspaper. Y'all don't even get a newspaper. Do y'all know what a newspaper is? I don't even read the newspaper either, so I can't say anything. I use this too. But overreading the headlines, seeing all that, and that's a terror. I don't know why. It's not right for me to say that I love that headline, but it was after Katrina. It's just like despair, chaos. You know, that's how terrible things were at the time in New Orleans. But we read the newspaper and we think, well, this is it. If Jesus doesn't come back now, I don't know what He's waiting on, right? This is what we see. This is what your aunt on Facebook is doing, right? She's reading. She sees something in the newspaper and she says, "Okay, that's it. It's over." You know,
She shares it.
Yeah, and she shares it. That's right. And 8,000 other people do, you know. And so we need to guard against this. We are living in unprecedented times in many ways. I read something this week that somebody said, may we live in precedented times. Can we stop having unprecedented times, you know? But we are living in unprecedented times in many ways. But the world has always been terrible. Ask the people in Nero's day when they were being lit up like torches to light parties. whether or not it felt like the end of the world. They would have told you the same thing, okay? And so we need to guard against looking at the newspaper and thinking, well, that's what Revelation 18 was talking about, you know. Guard against that, okay? So here's the biggest danger of Revelation, is it is ignoring it and then missing its message. Here's the big message of Revelation. Jesus is coming back. And his return is closer today than it was yesterday. He's going to win. Evil is going to be destroyed forever. The world's going to be judged. A new and perfect world is coming. Perfect world. The promise for every Christian is we're going to get to live in a perfect world. We're going to be perfect people. We're going to be in perfect relationships with a perfect God, and we're going to do that forever. Okay? So we should repent and trust Christ and live with urgency now. All right? That is the message of Revelation. That is what that's what Jesus through John wants us to understand. Okay? So let's look at a passage very quickly here in Revelation that is one of my favorite passages in chapter 4 of Revelation. Somebody read. Let's read verses 1 through. No, I'm sorry. Let's go to chapter 5. Somebody read verses 1 through 5 of chapter 5.
Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll written within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it.
Stop right there. I just want you to understand what's happening here before we read the rest of this. John has been brought up into heaven, and Jesus has said, these are the things that are going to come. So John's like, okay, this is what Jesus was talking about when he ascended into heaven. He's coming back, and he's about to set the world right. Right? And so he says, he looks at the throne, and there's God, and there's a scroll, and it has 7 seals on it. Can you imagine what might have been written on the scroll? What do you think is written on this scroll? He's been brought into heaven to find out what's about to come. So what do you think is on the scroll? What's about to come? It wasn't a trick question.
I think so creative.
All right. So what's happening is they need someone to open the scroll so all this stuff can happen, so God can win. All right. So somebody needs to open the scroll, and a loud voice says, "Who is worthy to open the scroll?" And it said they look in heaven and they look on earth and under the earth, and what's the problem?
No one can open it.
No one can open it. No one is worthy to open the scroll. And so what is John's reaction?
He cries.
He begins to weep loudly, he says, okay? And then, all right, now, pick up verse 5.
And one of the elders said to me, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals."
Okay, so John is weeping because the scroll can't be opened. And one of the elders like, "Weep no more, dude." Jesus is worthy to open the scroll. All right, and he calls him the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David. He's conquered. So the picture you have is this conquering king, full of power and strength, who's about to pop open that scroll. And then somebody read verse 6 for me real quick.
And I saw one like a slaughtered lamb standing in the midst of the throne, and the 4 creatures, and among the 4 elders he had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent into all the earth. So this conquering king who is worthy to open the scroll is right there. And he looks over at the conquering king, and what does he say he looks like? A slaughtered lamb.
A slaughtered lamb. Think about that. I mean, when he said to look over there, what do you think he's imagining he's about to see?
Great king.
Yeah, a great king, and instead he sees a slaughtered lamb, or one who looks like a slaughtered lamb. What is the point? How did Jesus conquer?
By his death.
By his death. through his death on the cross. This is the picture that they're giving, okay? And so we go down to verse 9 and we see now that Jesus has been presented, they begin to sing this new song. Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation, and you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on earth. And then you go down to verse 12. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. Verse 13, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory forever. And so this is the message of Revelation. This Jesus who died on the cross is coming back as a conquering king, and he's finally going to set the world right forever. And he is worthy and able to do that because he died for our sins. And that is the ultimate message of Revelation. Turn over to Revelation 19 now. I want you to see the final. You start getting in the back of the book, actually 21. Somebody read verses 1 through 4 of Revelation 21.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away.
So this is where we're headed. Okay, this is where the book of Revelation is taking us. A new heaven and a new earth, where the first heaven and the first earth have passed away. And what does he say? The holy city Jerusalem, which is representative of heaven, what does it say it does? Comes down to earth. So we're not talking about living on a cloud with a harp forever. Where does this say our eternal destination is? Here. A newly recreated heaven and earth that have now become one. Now you may look around this and go, I don't want to live here. But it's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. The first one. And how does look at verse 4. How is this? Well, look at verses 3 and 4. First of all, who's going to be here? God. And second of all, what does that mean about what this place is going to be like according to verse 5? Perfect. It's going to be perfect. You're going to wipe every tear from their eye. Death shall be no more. No more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, because the former things have passed away. And then verse 5, he says, He who's seated on the throne says, Behold, I'm making all things new. This is the great promise, not just of Revelation, but of the gospel. It is the promise that began all the way back in Genesis when man fell into sin and the world was broken. What God's plan is to take us back to where things would have been if we had never fallen into sin. That's everything he's been doing for the last however many thousand years. Everything he does throughout the entire Bible is to bring us back to Revelation 21, which is where Genesis 2 was, when God finished creating the world, okay? This perfect world. He's trying to get it. He's not trying, he's going to. He's taking us back to this perfect world. And that is the ultimate message of Revelation, that God is going to do whatever it takes. He's already done that, and he's going to continue to do whatever it takes to get us back to the place where we should have been all along. That's the message of Revelation, okay? All right, questions? Anybody want to add anything?
If we believe that the rapture happens before the millennium, is that what we said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Will we ever live in the new earth or just the new heaven?
Yes, so rapture, tribulation, we will return. Okay, let's see if I can find this real quick. I preached this at my mother's funeral. Let me see if okay. This is chapter 19, verse 11. It says, I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, the one sitting on it called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. This is Jesus about to return. One of my favorite stories, a guy named Russell Moore, he'd given a talk in New York City about Christian beliefs about sexuality, and a woman came up to him afterward. She said, I have never heard this kind of talk about what you believe about sexuality. He says this isn't even the beginning of this isn't even the weirdest thing by far that we believe. We believe a man who died is going to return to earth on a horse in the sky. And this is it right here. It says his eyes are like a flame of fire, and his head are many diadems, and he has a name written that no one knows but himself. His cloth is a robe dipped in blood, and the name on which it is called the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on white horses. And this is Jesus returning to destroy everything, to destroy evil forever. And guess who the army is?
Us.
We all gonna be on a horse. so get ready. That's the picture. We're returning with him to defeat. We're not gonna be, we're not going to have to do anything. Like, you don't have to worry about your swordsmanship right now, because Jesus is going to destroy the world going to destroy evil with the word, right? Because that's how powerful he is. And so yeah, we will come back with him, then we will rule and reign with him. It's not just we're going to be living around here, watching TV all day, binging Netflix. We're going to be ruling and reigning with Jesus forever, not just for those 1,000 years, but for all of eternity. Is the picture that we're being drawn here in Revelation. Does that answer your question?
That part right there, verse 11, is that before the 1,000 years?
That is, yeah, the 1,000 years come in chapter 20.
Right.
So that's the beginning of the 1,000 years. That's right.
It doesn't.
All right. Any other questions?
This is more of like a personal, not like a biblical question, but like I know I'm going, but is it normal, like, because I know my daughter is not going to be my daughter in heaven, so is it okay to be kind of upset that she's not going to be dependent on me?
Dependent?
Like right now, I'm her everything.
Yeah. Well, she's not going to be dependent on you in 20 years either.
Yeah, but if he's come back tomorrow, she's not going to be my 11-month-old in heaven.
Right. She's going to be your perfect. She's going to be your perfect. She's still going to be your daughter.
Like,
though.
if he came back right now, I'd be so excited about it. But part of me is like, please don't. Because I want her to be my 1-year-old.
I understand. I remember in high school when I would go to we would have these conferences in my church, and like, I just want to have a girlfriend first. Like we'd always have, like, there's always going to be something that you want to happen before Jesus comes back, So I think I understand that, but the book of Revelation ends with this: John has seen everything. And in verse 20 of chapter 22, he says, he who testifies to these things says, surely I am coming soon. And John says, amen. Come, Lord Jesus. So what the book of Revelation ought to help you to do as you read it and understand it is say, yeah, I'm going to miss out on some things, but what I'm going to get in return is going to be so much greater that I'm not going to worry about that kind of stuff when he comes back. How many of you read the Chronicles of Narnia when you were a kid? Handful of you? Okay. Love C.S. Lewis, and I love the Chronicles of Narnia. And let me just give you a quick, very quick synopsis of the Chronicles of Narnia. It's a story about a group of children who find a magical world, and in that magical world, there's a lion who rules, and that lion is representative of who Jesus is. Okay, that's the short synopsis of it. At the end of the Chronicles of Narnia, the children are captured in battle, and they're thrown into a cave, and they start to walk to the back of the cave. And as they walk, they keep walking, and they walk into another world. It's a completely different world. But they begin to look at this world, and it's the same world they were in before. It's just more real than it was before. They start saying, oh, this is that mountain, but oh gosh, it's so much more beautiful than it was before. What they realize is that they died in battle. And they're in heaven now. And what they discover about heaven is we think this is real. Like, we're here, we're real. Heaven is like some ethereal, it's like clouds and sky, and I can't really put my fingers on it. We're going to be spirits and that kind of stuff. And what they discover when they get to heaven is, oh no, that was the unreal. This is the real. This is the most real place. And C.S. Lewis ends that book, The Last Battle it's called. He ends it by saying, and thus begins the great story. All of their life on Earth and in Narnia was the cover and the title page and the content and the table of contents. And now begins the great story, which never ends, which every day is better than the next, and which goes on forever and ever. And that's the promise of heaven. Your life has not begun. This is the very, very beginning of your life. You are going to live forever. And if you are a believer, the promise is you're going to live forever in a perfect world, and not just sitting around bored all the time. You've got another life full of adventures and memories and work, and you're going to rule and you're going to reign, and this is going to happen for all of eternity. We're going to do in heaven what we would have done if sin had never messed up the world in the first place. And remember, before Adam and Eve fell into sin, they were given jobs, they were given work, they were told to take dominion over the world. That's what we're going to be doing for all of eternity. There may be football, I don't know for sure, okay? But what I know is that, you remember when Adam and Eve fell, God looks at Adam and he says, your work's gonna be really hard now. You know, you're gonna do it by the sweat of your brow. And that's what our lives are like now. They're tough, they're hard. But what we can know is we're gonna have work to do, and it's going to be satisfying, and we're never gonna be like, I can't wait for this day to be over. I hope not, because there's only gonna be one day. It's not gonna be night there. You know, we're gonna live forever, and it's gonna be a perfect world, and it's gonna be exactly what we always wanted and never even realized it. So we don't have to, and Savannah, I'm not pointing you out, because we all tend to do this. We're like, well, this is what I'm gonna miss. This is what I'm gonna miss. There will never be a day that you will be in heaven, that you will be in a new heaven and a new earth, and you'll be like, this is great. But come on, God, did I have to miss that? You know, this is great, but did I really have to go through all that junk to get to it? Nobody will ever do that. The promise of heaven is eternal satisfaction. Exactly what we were created to be forever. So we don't have to worry about what we're going to miss, because what we're going to get is going to be so much better. Okay? Anybody want to add anything? Questions? Comments? Okay. Well, that is the message of Revelation, and that's why I love it. Okay? All right. Nothing else. Let's close in prayer. Hunter, why don't you close us?
Most gracious and Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this day, Lord. Thank you for just allowing us to get together, Lord, and study your word, Lord. Just thankful that at the end of the day we know that there's going to come a day when we're going to have peace, and Lord, we're going to reign with you. Lord, I just thank you so much for just all your many blessings. Lord, thank you for your grace and your mercy. In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen.